Hi there, I'm Allison Kurak, owner of Stitch Real Estate Transaction Coordination Company, and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a special video to share with you guys. If you've been following me, you probably saw I recently, in the past few months, closed my 1,000th real estate transaction. This is a huge milestone I've been working towards as a transaction coordinator, so it was really exciting to hit it. And after I did, I wanted to reflect back on how far I've come, but also, what I've learned and what I could share with you guys who are maybe just starting on your TC journey or relatively new into it. What would I go back and tell myself? Like lessons I learned the hard way that you don't have to. So I've identified 5 core kind of pillars of things that I learned. These were the first things that came to mind for me, thinking back of what I learned and what's important. And so I want to share those with you guys and break them down today. As a reminder, before we dive in, if you enjoy any of my content, please hit the like and subscribe button. We are always working to put out more content for you guys. All right, I have my notes here just because I didn't want to forget anything. So let's dive right into the top 5 things I've learned closing over 1,000 real estate transactions as a transaction coordinator. All right, so number 1, this was the very first thing that I thought of when I was like, okay, what did I learn closing all of these deals? And the first thing I thought of is how important it is to be proactive. That was literally the first thing that came to mind when I was thinking about what would I share with other people, what would I share with my former self when it was my first transaction. And an overarching theme that is so important in real estate is to be proactive. Now, especially as a transaction coordinator, and I want to clarify, when I say be proactive, I don't always mean working ahead, like, okay, it's Monday, but I've already checked on all my tasks through Friday. Why I think working ahead and taking some steps ahead is a good thing, we also want to make sure we're focusing on other aspects of our business, right? So if you're an independent transaction coordinator, you own your own company, something like that, then there are many other aspects of the business you're gonna need to work on. So you don't want to just spend all day working ahead. You want to make sure you're being efficient, so you can, if you have 10 files in your pipeline, you could probably finish working, if you focused really efficiently, within 1 to 2 hours a day. And so then you can spend the rest of your time working on other things. So being proactive, maybe looking ahead a little bit on our transaction task, but that's not primarily what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about in terms of being proactive is anticipating and foreseeing potential issues, pitfalls, obstacles in a transaction before they happen. So a lot of this will come with some experience. If you have prior real estate experience in any part of the industry, then some of these things will be easier for you to spot. So an example of this may be that we learn our client lives in a different state. Well, sometimes, depending on the type of transaction, everyone can just e-sign, or sometimes they can sign the same day and they can fund off scanned copies. But sometimes a lender or someone may require overnighted documents, which means our client would need to sign a date early if they're out of state. So things that will come to mind as you learn more about the real estate transaction process and all of the different intricacies, but some things to look out for. So that's an example of where maybe, okay, I'm gonna let everybody in the transaction know really far up front that we have an out-of-state seller. That way, everyone can be aware if we need to make accommodations, if we need to move the closing up a date, the signing up a date, something like that, or if it's going to affect our closing and funding date, our moving process, anything like that. So being aware of things that may cause a little bit of, not turmoil, but may cause us to be off the track of a true cookie cutter transaction, which there's not that many of those, but anything like that. So maybe not even an issue, but just something we're being anticipative of and we are being proactive on letting everybody know. Or maybe I noticed something paperwork wise when I'm like, we have this, we might need this, or this is gonna mean this. Then I can change my task. I can go ahead and add tasks for myself to follow up on something, or get with my agent and say, hey, I noticed this on the contract. Does that mean we also need to do X, Y, Z? Go ahead and get those balls rolling so that you don't have to wait paperwork-wise for compliance to kick you back, or on other things for an issue to come up the week of closing, like, oh yeah, we do need to move that around, or oh this, etc. So being proactive in, as soon as you get a new transaction, kind of looking at the transaction as a whole with the information you have and figuring out, okay, is there anything that might need to be done a little earlier? Is there anything that maybe needs to be done a little bit later? Is there anything you need to bring to the agent's attention? So being proactive in terms of working ahead a little bit if you need to, but mainly in proactively anticipating issues, anticipating any road bumps, and proactively figuring out potential solutions, or thinking, what can we do now to help avoid any issues further down the road? So being proactive in everything, and you really don't want to be reactive for a ton of reasons, but particularly in this industry, there are going to be all kinds of different types of information, new contracts, document requests, emails, texts, calls coming at you all the time, especially as you scale up your business if you want to do a high volume of files. So you need to be proactive on focusing on what's important, foreseeing potential issues, and figuring out how can we solve those or start that process earlier so we're not scrambling like a day or two before closing. So tip number one of things I've learned is it is so important to be proactive instead of reactive as a real estate transaction coordinator and in real estate across the board. All right, lesson number 2 I've learned from closing over 1,000 real estate transactions is all about communication. So clients will come to us as transaction coordinators at my company, and they will say, it's just really important that my TC communicates with me. And it's just important. I've had a TC, I feel like they didn't communicate. I couldn't get them on the phone, things like that. And all throughout real estate transactions, you'll hear people talk about lack of communication or miscommunication and things like that. Even here in Texas, the Real Estate Commission had to put a rule in that you have to respond within like 2 days because I guess communication was that much of an issue. And on that topic, I want to say, even just besides, TC to agent communication, which if you're a TC, new TC, potential TC watching this, it is so critical to communicate with your agent. No one's ever gotten in trouble or upset with for over communicating. So anytime you have a thought, if something seems off to you, if you just want to be proactive in sending a communication, sending an update, something like that, communication between the agent and the TC is incredibly important. And on that note, the other topic is that across the board in a transaction, no news is very, very rarely ever good news in real estate. You may go to your doctor's office and they say, oh, if you don't hear from us, then all your blood work came back great, or whatever it may be. Okay, cool, no news is good news. Not so true in real estate. I don't know if ever once in my life we've not been able to communicate with someone and then it turned out we were all clear to close and ready to go. Typically, if people aren't responding, it's because either just a lack of communication on their end, or they've gone radio silent because something's wrong and they're trying to fix it. So it's important that we recognize that if we don't hear anything on transaction, that's not necessarily a good sign, and that may be new to you if you're new to the industry and new to being a transaction coordinator. So be aware that you should continue to follow up. If you're having a really hard time getting an answer from someone, maybe bring it to your agent's attention. Say, I'm concerned we haven't heard back on XYZ. Maybe that's the appraisal, maybe that's a repair item, whatever it is. And then they may tell you how to proceed from there, or they may take over to escalate to whoever it needs to be escalated to. So making sure we know that communications are number one priority, not only with our agents we're working with, but also with all parties to the transaction. So making sure we're timely communicating, and if we aren't getting those responses from others, that we are continuing to follow up or escalate or reach out to someone else if we need to, because we need to make sure that we are all communicating across the board. And as I mentioned, no news is really never good news. So we want to make sure we're getting regular updates, they're being communicated to all the parties, and everyone's in the loop on what's going on. That is just absolutely critical. All right, number 3 of lessons is that you must be flexible. So this is really important in real estate and as a transaction coordinator. And I wanted to highlight this because I think as transaction coordinators, a lot of times we think more in the black and white of it all. We see our checklists, our numbers, our documents, and we obviously want to have our templates, our checklists, our structured days. Like, that's very important. And that's more of the way our skill set is typically for transaction coordinators, how they want to think and work. But because you're working in real estate, even a, job that could be considered data entry or computer work is not going to be boilerplate every single time. So I want to highlight a couple things. We got to be flexible per transaction. Almost every single transaction I've ever worked on has at least one unique aspect to it. And these can be things that, come up over and over again, but from a standard cookie cutter transaction, almost everyone has something that's a little different, or something we may need to do, something we don't need to do, something that's being omitted, etc. So making sure that however you have your checklist set up, it's really flexible to edit them, to move stuff around, and that you're not so set in the checklist and in your day-to-day that you aren't able to be flexible if a fire comes up that needs to be put out. If you realize, okay, we actually need to do these tasks early, or you know what, typically I would do this 7 days before closing, but we're a little iffy on the closing, so maybe I'll do it 5 days before, or I'll set a follow-up task or something like that. So being flexible in terms of each transaction and how you work it, realizing that each transaction is unique, and having your system set up in a way where we do have our boilerplate go-to systems, but they're systems that are flexible in terms of easily moving stuff around, easily making notes, easily updating things, having different templates for different types of transactions. So being flexible on how things work. Also, I always want to know, okay, we've got a week towards closing. I've already got this done, we've already got the closing set up, etc. But sometimes things will literally come down to the wire. We try to avoid this as much as possible, and we never want it to be because we didn't do something, but sometimes that's just the nature of the industry. Whether it's a loan needs to wait till the last minute, something going on with the buyer or seller, and we aren't able to schedule closing till the morning of or something. We're gonna have to be flexible, that we're gonna have to, wait, be on the lookout for that as soon as it comes through, send our emails, make sure XYZ is done, cross all our T's, dot all I's, and be really flexible on stuff like that. So the industry can move at all different paces, and just making sure our checklist and our mindset is that we are making sure everything gets done, but we're flexible as to how and when sometimes, just because that will come up. Okay, and I also want to talk about being flexible per agent you work with. So in my experience, every agent likes to handle things a little bit differently with their transaction coordinator, and as any service provider, this should be totally fine. We don't want to get too bogged down in we do things exactly this way. And maybe this is contrary to what you hear from other transaction coordinators who share content online and stuff like this, but to me, to be a really good, excellent service provider, you have to be willing to be a little flexible for your clients. So maybe we have a list of services and our client doesn't need this thing, and they ask us if we could replace it with this thing. It's about the amount of same time and effort and falls into the general process of the transaction. I'm totally going to be okay with that. So making sure we're a little flexible in how we work with our agents, maybe how they want to communicate, how they want to send in new deals, being flexible even on things like how we maybe receive payments or anything like that. I recommend having systems in place, but multiple of them, so you can be as flexible as possible. Be willing to be flexible with your changes, how you're communicating, and anything else that the agent may need. Every agent, every brokerage, every team works a little bit differently. So it's important to be flexible with your services to make sure you can service the widest group of clients possible. And it just provides a better client experience. Who doesn't like things that are customized to them? So think about it that way. Do not ever, go down a rabbit hole of doing 10,000 extra things for a client that you wouldn't for someone else, but small changes, small tweaks here and there. Maybe we replace an email template we typically use with one that they provide and are comfortable with, anything like that. So be flexible on each transaction, recognize it's a little different, and be flexible on all the agents, teams, or brokerages you're working with, and know that they may want to do things just a little differently, and making sure you're providing the best level of somewhat customized service to what they need. That's something we're really passionate about. Our motto is perfectly tailored transactions, because we will tailor our services to exactly how the agent likes to do their business. So that's something I'm passionate about. And after closing 1,000 transactions, working with numerous agents, I think it is super important. All right. Number 4 is prioritizing. Honestly, after I came to number 4, I almost wanted to move it up to number 1, because that is how much I believe in it. And anytime I talk to a new TC, if I see a TC who's struggled with something, or they missed something, or it's just not clicking, I often find that the issue lies in prioritizing, and typically a lack of prioritizing. So what I mean by this is it is critical to prioritize the important task of the day. I recommend finding a system that allows you to mark things as high priority or red flag or red color code. Make a color code system, something where you can focus on your high priority task first in the morning. That way they're being addressed, and then maybe another system to follow up on them before the end of the workday, so you can make sure they're being acknowledged, or at least bring it to the appropriate party's attention. And so some examples of this is maybe you have a long checklist and there's something to follow up on the earnest money. And you're just working through your checklist from the top to the bottom. It's not organized, it's not color coded in any way. And then it's 4:30, you get to the bottom of the list and the earnest money is on there. And now it's due in 30 minutes. And you're sending a reminder like, hey, just wanted to check on the earnest money. Like, that is what we want to avoid no matter what, and that's a mistake I've seen TCs make before. So making sure you first off identify what are high priority tasks. Your deadlines are always going to be your highest priority. I don't even consider them high priority because they're above that. They're highest priorities. The first thing I do every single day is check my deadlines. I double check them 3 different ways, so triple check them, I guess. I'm going to make another video about that. But, and then I'll go through my emails, and then I check my red for me, which is my highest priority task. And then I check my yellow, which is my second tier priority task. And once all those have at least been somewhat addressed or I've checked on them, then I'll start working through the rest of my like blank colored checklist that's just tasks that need to be done, but don't have those high priority levels. So number 1, let's set up a system for checking our priorities, as I just mentioned. Almost all TC softwares have some type of way to, color code or distinguish things as high priority items. So look into that in whatever system you're using or whatever system you're considering using. And second, make sure you learn and try to even do some research on what is considered a high priority item. So some examples I'll give is, as I just said, deadlines. And then second for me, highest priority is going to be anything that's just urgent, right? As I mentioned before, in terms of being flexible, there are going to be some urgent and last minute things that come up throughout your career as a transaction coordinator. No matter how perfectly we work ahead, we're proactive, we check on things. This is real estate, and so it's crazy. And so there are always going to be times where something urgent does come up or something last minute. Example of something urgent for me would be maybe we need an amendment and we have a deadline at 5 o'clock. I haven't seen it come back from someone yet. I'm definitely going to mark that as high priority to make sure we receive that back. And then another example, maybe we have a closing tomorrow and we're still waiting on final numbers for the closing, then that's absolutely going to be a high priority for me to check on. So after my deadlines, anything that we have another deadline on that we're waiting on a piece of paperwork, anything on a really close upcoming closing, those are all going to be things that I am absolutely high prioritizing. Like I said, this is so important because especially as you scale, but even when you have a small amount of transactions, a lot of times you're waiting on things from other people, or you just have other things to do, other things that are more urgent. Maybe you get a bunch of new contracts in one day, and so you don't check on your task until it's like almost the end of the day. And these things can just come up. And so if we don't prioritize, like there's a chance that we will miss key things. It's important to recognize, and I recognize this for myself, I almost never get every single thing on my task list done in a day. So if I didn't prioritize the most important things first, then there's a chance, as I mentioned, they could be missed. So prioritize, prioritize, prioritize. I've said this in interviews and conversations I've had with people, when I coach to people on my team, how critical it is to prioritize. We're advertising ourselves as people who are checking the deadlines, making sure stuff isn't missed. Well, what if we aren't correctly prioritizing those items? So figuring out what's important. I gave you a couple examples there. As you go, you'll learn. Also for me, maybe a tier 2 high priority item would be if an agent specifically asks for something, even if it's not important for me, like, oh, I was gonna do that tomorrow. If they're asking for it, there's probably a reason it's important to them. So that would automatically move it up on my priority list for the day. But as I mentioned, you probably won't get everything done in one day, even if you have a lower number of files. So it's important that you prioritize and at least make sure the important things are getting done first. All right, and number 5 of top 5 things I've learned closing over 1,000 real estate transactions as a transaction coordinator is that you will never regret doing the right thing or taking the extra step, going the extra mile. And so what I mean by this is you may come across things as you work as a TC and in your TC business of, oh, you know what, I don't have time to do that today, it's not that important, or I noticed something looks kind of off on this transaction, or someone said something that didn't sit right with me that might affect our closing, but I don't know what to do, or I'm not sure if I need to do anything. What is the right thing to do? Should I bring this up? We probably should fix this, but we probably also could get away with it without fixing it and everything would be fine. No one else has said anything. And that's a lot of just like different thoughts that may go through your head. And I've had them go through my head too, right? Or, oh, well, the agent didn't follow up with me about this, so it's probably not that important, right? But what I've learned is that you will never regret doing the right thing. If something's wrong and needs to be fixed, bring it to the agent's attention if you don't have the authority to just fix it. If something seems off and you're worried about it, escalate it to your agent's attention, and then they can decide what to do from there. They may ask you to help with something. They may say, no, it's fine. We're a service provider for them. They are always going to have the final say on the transaction. And so it's important that if we think something's off though, don't just sit here and be quiet. Don't be afraid to voice a concern, to voice something that you think may need to be corrected, to take an extra step. I've found that literally in my gut, I'd be like, oh, well, you know what? I'm busy today and it's a holiday weekend. I don't know if I'm gonna get this done, but the agent hasn't said anything, so it's fine. Well, guess what? It hasn't been fine. And so the handful of times that's happened in my life, it's really just reminded me that if I see something that may need to be followed up on, if I see something that I'm not sure about, if I see something I have a concern about, always adding a task to my list or bringing it to my agent's attention to follow up on it, to say, hey, this looks off to me, just FYI, let them proceed with it from there. But it always just helps me sleep better at night. It's helped transactions. It's caught things before that did need to be fixed by the agent, or another conversation that needs to be had, or things like that. And it has just always paid off. And if I haven't, followed my checklist, done the right thing, kept a keen eye for things and informed others and informed my agent, it has backfired on me before. So I know it can be tempting, especially if you're newer, you feel like maybe you don't know everything, you're like a little concerned, but I would much rather bring something to someone's attention that could potentially blow up a transaction or cause an issue or an error for our client down the line than just kind of sit here and be quiet. So that is the last thing I want to leave y'all with of my top 5 things I've learned closing over 1,000 transactions, is that it always pays off to do the right thing, escalate something to someone else's attention if you need to, and then go the extra mile. Someone needs a little extra help with something, do it. A client has some unique circumstances we need to work around, make them feel as comfortable as possible and do it. These are all things that not only have I learned as lessons, just should be baseline lessons, but a lot of these things will also help you stand out as a great transaction coordinator and a great service provider. So we want to make sure we are being flexible, we're communicating, we're being proactive, we are always doing the right thing, and then also, most importantly, we're prioritizing. And a lot of these things will kind of fall hand in hand, right? If we're proactively communicating, that means we're prioritizing the right things. If we're being flexible, that means we're paying attention to maybe being proactive on task. And maybe that means we are always doing the right thing, being a little flexible to go the extra mile, to change things, to bring something to someone's attention. So these all kind of tie together, but I hope if you are a newer TC or someone who is exploring this career, that you find these helpful and that it is something I wish I would have told myself. So you can watch this video and learn from my lessons so you don't have to learn the hard way. Thank you so much for watching. I'm excited to have passed this milestone and be able to share some of this knowledge of things I've learned with you along the way. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you enjoyed this video or any of our content, please hit the like and subscribe button. Any questions for me, leave comments below. I will always get back to you, and often I'll even make a video to answer your question in more depth. So comment below. Please like and subscribe, and check us out on Instagram if you aren't following us there already too. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.